More than a decade ago, unfortunately, the Drew Peterson case turned into something of a circus.
It's what I wanted. I just wanted to ensure that he didn't get out.
He's still my dad. I still love him. But basically everything you knew, we were wrong.
We trust those within our law enforcement to both protect and serve, but what happens when they don't? Join us as we have a look at 10 corrupt cops gone crazy after getting life sentences. Number 1. Daniel Holtzclaw. In a courtroom drama that could only be rivaled by a Hollywood thriller, the disgraced ex-Oklahoma City police officer Daniel Holtzclaw found himself on the wrong side of justice as he was handed a staggering 263-year prison sentence. It was a sentence that would send shockwaves across the nation, and it marked the culmination of a harrowing tale of corruption and abuse that scarred the lives of countless African-American women. Holtzclaw's fall from grace began with a series of calculated and heinous actions targeting vulnerable women from one of Oklahoma City's most poor neighborhoods. His modus operandi was disturbing as it was twisted. He preyed upon women with criminal records, assuming their past would silence any potential outcry. From groping to assault, the horrors inflicted by this rogue officer knew no boundaries. This case was even more chilling because Holtzclaw, whose father served as a police lieutenant on another force, had managed to evade justice for far too long. All of his victims were African-American women who faced a daunting uphill battle in a pursuit for justice. The trial drew sharp criticism when an all-white jury was selected, sparking protests and cries of racial bias, but justice, though delayed, would not be denied. The sentencing of 263 years sent a resounding message, a victory not only for the 13 brave women, known as the OKC 13, but countless others who have suffered in silence for centuries. The case highlights a long-standing battle against racism, oppression, and the assault that black women have endured. Holtzclaw's attempt to seek a new trial based on alleged evidence withholding was swiftly denied. His sister runs a blog dedicated to telling her brother's untold story, but the weight of evidence against him is undeniable. His defense team would struggle with continues in appeals, but the walls of justice closed in on him. The stories of his victims are harrowing. Janie Liggins, a grandmother of 12, recounted a traumatic encounter that could have ended in tragedy, while Sade Hill, intoxicated and vulnerable, fell victim to Holtzclaw's deceitful promises. And that's not all, because each one of his victims will have to live with the immense suffering and trauma that he's inflicted not only upon them, but their loved ones as well. Number 2. Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin is a former police officer who's known for his involvement in the death of George Floyd. He was convicted of murder for kneeling on Floyd's neck, which sparked global protests and revolutionary change in America. The former police officer, whose name became synonymous with cruelty, would be sentenced to slightly over 20 years in jail. The historic ruling occurred almost 7 months after he pled guilty to federal charges of violating George Floyd's constitutional rights in a tragic event that took place in May of 2020. In a stinging rebuke of his behavior, the district judge, the voice of justice in this dramatic courtroom drama, minced no words, calling the treatment of George Floyd offensive and unconscionable, leaving everyone wondering how a man that was sworn to protect could descend into such darkness. Prosecutors, wielding the sword of justice, demanded a 25-year sentence, highlighting Chauvin's abuse of authority and cold-hearted actions. On the other hand, the defense pled for a more lenient 20-year sentence, arguing that Chauvin had shown remorse and accepted the responsibility for his actions. In a surprising twist, the gavel finally fell, decreeing a 21-year prison term with a slight reduction for time served. This decision would add another layer of complexity to his 22.5-year sentence for his state-level convictions that were related to George Floyd's demise. It ensured that he'll spend decades behind bars. Chauvin transformed from a defiant denier to a convicted felon who was willing to admit his guilt. The courtroom held its breath as he briefly addressed the Floyd family, offering vague well wishes but failing to muster an apology. George Floyd's brother, who had endured sleepless nights since that fateful day, passionately called for the maximum sentence, declaring that his family had received a life sentence of their own. Justice has to be served. Those officers, they have to be convicted. The emotional courtroom echoed with voices of the past as John Pope, The young man whose encounter with Chauvin in 2017 had forever altered his life shared his harrowing experience. Chauvin's mother painted a different picture of her son, describing him as a caring man, while emphasizing the importance of forgiveness and unity. The actions that day, filmed on many cameras, would spark worldwide rallies against institutional racism and police brutality. As we reflect on this historic sentencing, Minneapolis Attorney General Keith Ellison's remarks ring true. It is another step toward justice, a message that no one, not even those in uniform, are above the law. Number 3. Joe Ferrari. In a jaw-dropping twist of fate, the former high-rolling Thai police chief, once known as Joe Ferrari for his impressive collection of luxury vehicles, has plunged into infamy. This tale of corruption, brutality, and national outrage shocked the nation. The dramatic downfall began in August when a leaked video emerged, exposing him and his colleagues during a harrowing interrogation. They'd callously wrapped plastic bags around the head of a 24-year-old suspect, a scene that would ultimately lead to the man's tragic demise. Thailand was outraged, and the nation's anger was obvious. Fortunately, justice was served in a Thai courtroom, and he was found guilty of murder by torture. The sentencing initially held a death penalty but was swiftly reduced to a lifetime behind bars. The court's leniency cited Ferrari's attempts to acknowledge his actions against the victim and his payment of funeral expenses for the bereaved family. However, Ferrari was not alone in facing the music, as 5 out of 6 accomplices in the brutal interrogation were convicted of murder and handed life sentences that would forever change their lives, with another officer receiving a lesser punishment thanks to his cooperation in the investigation. Outside of the courtroom, the family would express their anguish, stating that everyone involved needed to learn their lesson, and tears echoed as AFP news agency reported the heart-wrenching ordeal. When the shocking video went viral, Ferrari had fled his post but ultimately surrendered to authorities, and in a press conference he claimed that the suspect's demise was a tragic accident, vehemently denying any intentions to take his life. He also rebuffed a claim of demanding a bribe during the encounter. The alleged torture unfolded after the suspect was instructed to double a previously agreed bribe for his release and that of his girlfriend. When he refused, tensions would flare, which led to the disturbing incident that rocked Thailand. This scandal struck a nerve in a nation where the police had long been accused of incompetence and corruption. In addition to this, Ferrari's lavish lifestyle had also fueled the fires of public outrage. Living in a luxury home in Bangkok, he possessed an astonishing fleet of at least 42 vehicles, which included a rare Lamborghini worth approximately 1,000 times more than his monthly salary. The rise and fall of Joe Ferrari serves as a reminder of the consequences of unchecked power and corruption within law enforcement. Thailand, like many nations, has been forced to confront its own demons as justice seeks to cleanse the tarnished badge of honor worn by its police force. Number 4. Michael Dotro. Former Edison police officer Michael Dotro's life took a jaw-dropping twist that reads like a Hollywood crime thriller. In a shocking turn of events, this corrupt police officer went off the rails after being slapped with a hefty 20-year prison sentence. Dotro's wild journey into the abyss began when he set fire to the home of his own superior officer, Captain Mark Anderko, with the captain and his family still inside. What's truly mind-boggling is Dotro's utter lack of remorse. Not only did he fail to apologize to the terror-stricken family, but he also showed no regrets for tampering with witnesses or for the other officers who had lost their careers due to their alliance with him. As the judge handed down the sentence, Dotro, with a poker face, remained silent. It was as if he was living in a different reality. His sentencing would be part of a plea deal and was the culmination of a dark saga that spanned 5 years, during which his actions would plunge the police department into turmoil. Charges were brought against Dotro as far back as 2013, and the prosecutor worked tirelessly to cleanse the police department of corruption. His commitment to upholding justice has seen corrupt officers removed and a renewed sense of integrity restored. With over 50 brand new officers hired in recent years and robust safeguards in place, the police department is now a beacon of hope. As the gavel fell on Dotro's sentencing, a chilling revelation would unfold. His own wife Alicia had labeled him a manipulative monster. She expressed her desires to see him taken away in handcuffs, yearning for a brand new start. His attorney, Robert Norton, reluctantly accepted the plea bargain, hinting at the painful ordeal that his family had endured. But Dotro's litany of crimes was just too much to bear for those who once knew him as a different person. His dark chapter included horrific crimes like arson, attempted murder, and official misconduct, witness tampering, and more. He had betrayed the oath that he took as a police officer, turning his back on the community that he had sworn to protect. Prosecutor Russell Curley aptly described his wrath as something out of the Old Testament, a relentless thirst for vengeance. Dotro's extensive history with criminal justice system started long before he joined the police force and raised questions about his true nature. Being convicted on over 40 counts, it was concluded that there was no rehabilitation in sight for Dotro. An unwavering determination would spread across, warning Dotro that if he dared to offend again, the law would catch up with him once more. Number 5. Zachary Wester. Former Jackson County Sheriff's Deputy Zachary Wester, once a guardian of justice, is now heading behind bars for a roller coaster ride of 12 years. The courtroom drama unfolded as this corrupt police officer faced the music for a slew of shocking charges, leaving everyone dumbfounded. The young officer, who was only 28 years old, found himself in the hot seat, sentenced to 12.5 years in prison. He would be brought on charges and felonies like racketeering, official misconduct, evidence fabrication, and false imprisonment, along with misdemeanors like possession of a controlled substance, drug paraphernalia, and perjury. Wester was the talk of the town, with a whopping 67 charges that were hanging over his head. However, a twist in the plot saw most of them vanishing into thin air after a weeks-long trial in Florida's 14th Judicial Circuit. Wester, in a bid to make the narcotics squad, had been accused of planting drugs in vehicles of innocent motorists during routine traffic stops in 2017 and 2018. The prosecution was not ready to allow him to get off easy, though. Prosecutor Tom Williams demanded a 15-year sentence compared to the statutory guidelines. Williams would argue that Wester's misdeeds did not only end with planting evidence, his lies also led to innocent people being convicted under the same courthouse roof where he would later be found guilty. Williams passionately declared that Wester's actions shattered the trust of the public, a trust that they had willingly placed in their government for safety and protection. He emphasized that with great power came great responsibility, and Wester had blatantly violated that sacred bond. During proceedings in the courtroom, one victim by the name of Teresa Odom would seize the moment to speak her truth. She bravely faced Wester, revealing how he had robbed her of her credibility and her precious role as a mother and grandmother. Her heartfelt words struck a chord that he would never truly know what he had done to her until he had children of his own. But there is more. In a twist, a flurry of letters, almost 50 of them, would arrive in the courtroom, all in support of Wester. Friends, family, and his wife Rebecca would all paint a different picture of the fallen officer. They described him as a compassionate and loving man who was always ready to lend a helping hand. Defense attorneys would make one last-ditch effort to secure Wester's freedom, along with appeals, but the judge was having nothing of it. With 18 counts against him, which included the bombshell for racketeering, there was no escape. Number 6. Eric DeValconaire. In a shocking turn of events, a former Kansas City police officer by the name of Eric DeValconaire, who was once entrusted with upholding the law, had been handed a life-altering sentence. DeValconaire would be placed on trial for the tragic massacring of Cameron Lamb in 2019. And before you think that's the end of the story, you should brace yourself for the unexpected twists and turns in the saga. DeValconaire, a white police officer, was facing 6 years in prison for the involuntary manslaughter and armed criminal actions. The courtroom drama unfolded as the judge, in a rare move, would order these sentences to be served concurrently. It's a sentence that has left the world in awe. And what's even more astounding is that the officer, despite his convictions, was not behind bars as you may expect. He's actually walking free on bond while his legal team mounts an appeal. The decision raised eyebrows and ignited controversy. Some argued that justice was delayed and denied, while others saw it as a sign of the legal system's complexities. Lamb's mother would call the sentence a fair decision during an emotional news conference. However, the pain that she endured was far from over. She had hoped that the case would serve as a wake-up call to the entire police community and the city itself. and Lamb's stepfather echoed her sentiments, expressing the hope that the case would bring about much-needed change. The Valconaire had the audacity to seek freedom while appealing his conviction, and the judge actually granted it. The judge stated that he didn't view incarceration as necessary during the appeals process. It was a move that left many questioning the system's integrity. The case, which began with the tragic shooting of Cameron Lamb in December of 2019, sent shockwaves throughout the community. The Valconaire and his partner had responded to a seemingly routine traffic incident, but the situation quickly spiraled out of control. The officers, who were dressed in plain clothing and brandishing weapons, entered a backyard without a warrant. The fatal shots were fired as Lamb was slowly backing his pickup truck into his garage. The officers claimed that they saw a threat, but conflicting accounts and evidence would cast doubt on their actions. Lamb's partner testified that Lamb had his hands on the steering wheel, fingers spread apart, and that there was no gun in sight. Moreover, medical records would show that Lamb had limited use of his left hand due to a pre-existing injury. Number 7. Roger Rogerson. An 82-year-old former police officer, once hailed as a hero, is now confined to a prison in Australia. That officer is none other than Roger Rogerson, Australia's most corrupt cop, who recently celebrated his 82nd birthday in prison. But there is a twist in this real-life crime saga. He's not giving up on life on the outside of those walls just yet. Rogerson, who would be sentenced to life in prison alongside fellow former detective Glenn McNamara for the murder of 20-year-old Jamie Gall in May of 2014, is making one last-ditch effort to escape his life sentence. This is not your typical plotline. It's a roller coaster of corruption, murder, and a dash of dark humor. Rogerson's journey into infamy began long before Gall's tragic demise, with corruption claims dating back to the 1980s. And the past does have a way of catching up with the future, and in 2016, Rogerson and McNamara would be found guilty of a crime described as extensive in its planning, brutal in its execution, and callous in its aftermath by Justice Jeffrey Ballou. They were sentenced to life, and it seemed as though it would be the end of the road for Rogerson. However, just when you thought it was over, he pulled a surprise move. He applied to the High Court of Australia for an appeal. His conviction shed light on the need for accountability in law enforcement and the consequence of abusing one's position, and serves as a reminder that justice should be blind, and those who break the law, regardless of their background, have to face the consequences for their action. Number 8. Stephen Mitchell. In a stunning turn of events, a former police officer sentenced to 2 life terms for heinous crimes against vulnerable women during his duty has been released from prison after only 7 years. The judge's ominous warning at the time of sentencing that this corrupt cop may never see freedom again has now been proven wrong. PC Stephen Mitchell, infamous for his reign of terror that victimized as many as 30 women, was described as a manipulative narcissist by those who had suffered at his hands. Psychiatric evaluations deemed him to be a high risk to women, suggesting that he should remain behind bars indefinitely. However, the parole board made a shocking decision to clear his release and allow him to return to his family home in Glasgow. The case is reminiscent of the John Warby scandal, where the black cab criminal was granted freedom after only 9 years in prison, despite having assaulted more than 100 women. Mitchell's release raised serious concerns about the justice system and the protection of casualty. Exclusive photos capture Mitchell appearing fresh-faced and healthy, enjoying the sunshine outside of his parents' home as he embarks on a return to normal life. However, one of his terrified victims, who asked to remain anonymous, expressed outrage at the decision, asserting that it was wrong that he could get on with his life when he ruined so many others. His crimes that were committed against women that he encountered while on duty at a police station in Newcastle, where he preyed upon the vulnerable, which included addicts, shoplifters, and even disabled teenagers, misusing his position of authority to carry out horrific actions. Many of his sufferers were driven to the brink of despair as he used police records to stalk them relentlessly. The sufferer who spoke out against Mitchell was initially arrested for shoplifting and became the target of his manipulation. She described him as evil and a narcissist who believed that the world revolved around him, and expressed shock at his early release, stating that it was never expected, especially considering the gravity of his offenses. Mitchell's release raised concerns amongst activists and campaigners who advocated for the rights and protection of sufferers of assault, Rachel Chris, co-director at the End Roughness Against Women Coalition, would point out that the judge had previously deemed Mitchell a danger to women, and that his crimes had showcased his willingness to exploit vulnerabilities. Mitchell faced a violation and assault trial in 1991, which was dropped after only 1 day in court. His crimes took 7 years to come to light, and he would be fired in 2007 for engaging in intimate activity with a suspect. In 2011, he would receive 2 life sentences for assaulting 16 women, but detectives believe there were at least 14 more victims whose cases were not strong enough for prosecution. The trial judge had labeled him a ruthless, passionate predator and warned that his release would only be considered if it was safe and in the public interest. His release follows the controversy surrounding John Warby's release, which a judge of the High Court had blocked. Campaigners argue that Mitchell's release betrays the sufferers and defies justice and logic. Number 9. Darnell Garcia. Once a martial arts sensation, a Hollywood actor, and a respected DEA agent, Darnell Garcia's life took a wild and unexpected turn that would rival any Hollywood blockbuster. This incredible story begins in the streets of New York, where Garcia was born, and unfolds in the sunny landscapes of California, where he grew up with dreams as big as the Hollywood sign. Garcia's early years were far from a smooth ride. He was known in his neighborhood for his car racing antics, which even got him expelled from the Manuel Arts High School. However, fate had a twist in store for him. His gymnastic skills would catch the eye of the Washington High coach, who offered him a spot on the team, allowing him to graduate and earn his high school diploma. After working in a steel plant and an aircraft company, his life took another turn when he was drafted to the Army in 1966 and continued as he became a military policeman, earning 7 letters of commendation during service. The real twist in his tale comes when he joined the DEA after a stint in the Los Angeles Police Department, and in 1985, he made headlines by standing up against a transfer to Detroit, claiming national origin discrimination. A legal battle ensued, leading to his triumphant reinstatement in 1986 by the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the real shocker, however, was yet to come. In the early 1990s, Garcia, along with fellow agents John Jackson and Wayne Countryman, faced court proceedings for drug theft and money laundering. In a dramatic turn of events, Garcia would be sentenced to 80 years in prison for his involvement in narcotics trafficking and money laundering, while Countryman received 5 years. Locked away for 2 decades, his life could have been a tragic story of a promising career gone astray. However, his indomitable spirit and determination would keep him going. After serving 21 years behind bars, he was finally released, ready to take on a new chapter of his life. From martial arts championships to the silver screen, from military service to battling with the DEA, his life story was nothing short of a roller coaster ride. Number 10. Drew Peterson. Former police officer Drew Peterson would once be hailed as Police Officer of the Year, but found himself in the throes of an extraordinary twist of fate. The disgraced ex-officer earned notoriety for being convicted of the murder of his wife and seemed to have taken an unexpected liking to his new life behind bars. In an exclusive interview from the confines of a maximum security federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, he revealed that his current situation was a far cry from the conditions he had endured in a former facility. With a hint of sarcasm, he quipped that his previous cell resembled that of a horror movie, with urine and feces smeared on the walls, and likened the sorry state of his mattress to something that was unfit even for a dog. But there is a twist. Peterson, who is now 65 years old, sees his new federal prison as an upgrade, almost as though he's living the dream. This revelation was all the more astonishing considering the heinous crimes that he committed. His journey from a celebrated officer to a convicted criminal begins with the demise of his ex-wife, Kathleen, in 2004. He was subsequently sentenced to 38 years for her murder and an additional 40 years for a conviction that related to a plot to take the prosecutor's life who had put him away. The threat that he posed to prison security would lead to his transfer from the state prison to the federal. However, what truly thrust him into the national spotlight was the disappearance of his fourth wife, Stacy, in 2007. Despite vanishing without a trace, no charges would be filed against him in connection with her case. Peterson did admit to concerns about the prosecutor eventually implicating him, and throughout 2 separate 15-minute interviews, his unwavering assertion of innocence was striking. He had maintained that he'd done no harm to either of his wives, suggesting that there was still hope for Stacy's return, while citing cases of women reappearing years later. Surprisingly, he claimed to have no prison romance and expressed regret about his failed relationships outside of the walls, musing about how he should have remained a bachelor given the dismal outcomes of his attempts at love. Incarcerated until at least 2081 and still appealing his murder-for-hire conviction, Peterson places the blame on his defense attorneys for mishandling the case. He intends to challenge the Illinois Supreme Court's decision to uphold his murder conviction in federal court.